Hello, everybody. Welcome. We'll start in a few minutes, just as in a few moments, as people are joining. So thank you, everybody, for joining. We have a very interesting and exciting presentation, set of discussions today. We will be starting with some high-level interventions from people who have been very, very involved in the work on future generations. We will start with discussions about the current status of the work on future generations in terms of ongoing legal processes, the declaration on future generations, and the current state of that, human rights developments, including the most recent report on the right to development of the Special Rapporteur on the right to development, and on the Maastricht principles on the human rights of future generations. After that, we will then be moving to a panel of experts who are engaging with these, and we'll be asking them to talk about their own work to advance the legal protection of the rights of future generations and to get their perspectives on what are the next steps for the promotion of the human rights of future generations. So you have with you some of the leading experts in this area who really know what's going to happen and who are actually shaping this field. So I'm actually very privileged to be moderating your panel. My name is Ashfaq Alfan. I'm the Director of Climate Justice at Oxfam USA, and I'm one of the members of the draft committee of the Maastricht Principles on Future Generations. So without further ado, we'll go to our first high-level panelist, and that's Ambassador Odo Tevi, the permanent representative of the Republic of Vanuatu to the United Nations. Vanuatu, as you will see, is basically the legal superpower on climate change, initiating a whole slew of developments using the law to the maximum extent. So Ambassador Tevi has been in his role as a permanent representative of Vanuatu for 10 years now, and he's chaired the special committee on the UN Charter and strengthening of the organization, the UN Asia Pacific Group, and he was elected vice president of the UN Pledging Conference for Development Activities. And he was also involved in the intergovernmental negotiations on the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. So we have a video address for him because the current timing doesn't work for him to be in person. So we'll play that now. Oh, and before we play that, I will just ask colleagues to remind you that interpretation is available. So if you click on the button which has three dots, you will get the interpretation, and that is available in English, Spanish, and French. And just a reminder for English speakers that we do have some presentations in Spanish. So please do click on the interpretation button and click English as your language. Otherwise, you will not get English interpretations when the presentation is in English and Spanish. Seb, do you want to just give the instructions in French, perhaps?
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Juste un rappel technique avant le début de ce webinaire. Vous avez les trois petits points en bas de l'écran qui vous donneront accès à l'interprétation et vous pouvez choisir l'interprétation en français pour pouvoir suivre ce webinaire dans cette langue. Merci à tous.
Thank you. And I'll maybe ask if Astrid or one of the other colleagues could maybe just give the Spanish instructions.
Claro que sí. Buenos días con todas, todos y todes. Este webinar también va a estar interpretado en español, así que para que puedan escuchar el canal de español, lo que tienen que hacer es hacer un clic abajo en el icono del mundo que dice interpretación y seleccionar español.
Thank you. And just to indicate that we will have a Q&A session, but the best way to engage is to type a question in the chat. You'll see a Q&A button at the bottom, and there's an opportunity for you to add questions, which will be answered as we go along, and some of them we'll discuss verbally. Okay, let's go to the first presentation from Ambassador Odotevi.
Good morning, everyone. It is indeed an honor to be here, and thank you to all our respected partners of convening this event. I am sorry I cannot be with you today. The Republic of Vanuatu welcomes the forthcoming Summit of the Future of the United Nations as an international effort to strengthen our institutions, commitments, and multilateralism. We thank all delegations for the collective efforts that have gone into existing drafts of Pact for the Future and civil society for their continued support and championing of the key issues. Particularly following the UNGA resolution on the right to a healthy environment, the close relationship between environmental protection and the upholding of human rights has never been clearer, with important consequences for the protection of future generations. Vanuatu is committed to the effective protection of human rights and environmental justice and looks favorably upon the adoption of the Declaration on Future Generations as an important international tool in this regard. In ensuring lasting climate justice, particularly for small island states that are heavily vulnerable to the effects of climate change, it is essential to have enforceable legal tools. The interconnected impacts of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss magnify the strain on our already struggling economies, and science confirms that we must act urgently to address the issue. Our unique circumstances as small island states may set us apart, but they do not diminish potential to partner as equals in pursuing mutually beneficial outcomes for our countries, advocating for people and the future we want. This is one of the many reasons that Vanuatu, together with a group of co-countries, has been leading efforts that secured a request for an advisory opinion from the ICJ on the responsibilities of states around climate change. Given the profound ramification of climate change on every aspect of human life for present and future generations, the ICJ opinion can provide numerous benefits, such as clarifying the rights and obligations of member states in connection with climate change and facilitating international cooperation in this area. Climate change remains the greatest threat facing humanity, and in order to ensure a habitable planet for future generations, Vanuatu considers strong legal standards and enforceability as essential. This is why Vanuatu, alongside 12 other nations, are calling on UN member states to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty initiative. Together, we can create a global framework for the fast, fair, safe, and equitable phase out of fossil fuels. We are also taking other firm actions in this area. Our nation, with co-sponsorship from Fiji and Samoa, recently proposed an independent crime of ecocide to the International Criminal Court. Ecocide, the willful or reckless large-scale destruction of nature, continues to advance rapidly as a legal concept, from national proposals all over the world to the recent criminalization of the conduct comparable to ecocide in the EU. For us small islands, better prevention of future environmental destruction is just as fundamental as mitigating and adapting to existing damage, and criminalization of the severest forms of environmental destruction at the international level can and should play a crucial role in the protection of rights for present and future generations. We kindly invite all interested stakeholders to reach out to our mission on this matter and support our efforts. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate that presentation. As you can see, this is why I described Vanuatu as a legal superpower on international law and climate change. Well, we'll turn now to the second presentation, which is from Ambassador Olivier Mace, the permanent representative of Luxembourg to the UN. So he has been in this role since 2021, and previous to that, he was the Director for Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Luxembourg for previously about 6 years. So we also have that as a recording, so which we'll play now. If you can just bear with us, it'll play in a moment.
Entirely centered around the needs and excellencies, distinguished special rapporteurs, colleagues. First of all, I want to express how pleased I am to address this audience today. I apologize for not being connected live with you due to other commitments, but I'm looking forward to hearing about today's discussions from my colleague who is with you online now. The Declaration on Future Generations is a great achievement of the United Nations, and it will play a key role in the continued discussion on future generations at the UN and around the world. The negotiations of the Declaration on Future Generations were the first global intergovernmental process entirely centered around the needs and interests of future generations. It has allowed all member states to express and exchange their views and demands regarding the lives of those generations yet to be born. It has also allowed to raise concerns and contemplate the impact of current and emerging challenges on peace, security, and sustainable development for present generations and future generations. The Declaration on Future Generations has been negotiated, like the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact, for months now, with the goal to strike the balance between the different priorities of all member states, representing all regions. And I want to pay tribute especially to my colleagues, the ambassadors of Jamaica and the Netherlands for skillfully facilitating the declaration. In the process of the declaration, this bridge building exercise has been particularly remarkable. In fact, beyond reaffirming and strengthening previously made commitments to peace and security, to human rights and development, we have recognized our duty to ensure that our policies and decisions of today cannot be at the expense of the needs and interests of generations to come. The declaration recognizes the intergenerational multiplier effect of our actions and inactions today, and it seeks to promote intergenerational thinking, solidarity, and partnerships. Now, what is the way forward? The declaration is only a first step in the direction of expanding the framing of our current debates to include the consideration of the impact on future generations. We must ensure that the conversations on issues impacting present and future generations alike are guided by the principles, the commitments, and the deliverables agreed to in the Declaration on Future Generations. In his report on our common agenda, the Secretary General noted that if we had taken more serious action to limit global temperature rise or invest in pandemic preparedness, we would be much closer to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals today. This is very sobering, and we must learn from the mistakes of the past and strive not to make them again in the future. So let us make sure that efforts to achieve the SDGs are now accelerated without trade-off between meeting the needs of the present and taking into account the needs of the future in a true spirit of leaving no one behind. In the words of the Declaration on Future Generations, let us seize the opportunity that present generations possess to leave a better future for generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We really appreciate that intervention about the declaration from the ambassador. And as he indicated, one of his colleagues is available to also answer any questions you may have. Well, we'll move to our third presentation, which is from Professor Surya Deva, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development. He has been in that role since May 1st, 2023. He's a professor at Macquarie Law School and director of the Center for Environmental Law at Macquarie University in Australia. He conducts research in the areas of business and human rights, comparative constitutional law, international human rights law, sustainable development, climate change, and gender equality. We'll move over to his video now.
Hello everyone. One of the challenges that we see in the current model of development is that the model is not operating within the planetary boundaries. We see that the environment, climate, and biodiversity are not being taken account in the model of development. That is why I have proposed a planet-centered participatory model of development. In my most recent report to the Human Rights Council, I focused on the right to development of children and future generations. In this side event, which is very important to focus on the human rights of future generations. And this is very timely because the states in New York are going to adopt a declaration of future generations. In my report, I trace the history of the evolution about the needs, interests, and the rights of future generations. We can trace it as far as back to the Stockholm Declaration of 1972. But we can also see references to future generations in the very definition of sustainable development, as well as in Rio Declaration and the Vienna Declaration. And of course, we have very landmark Maastricht Principles of 2023, which unpack the human rights of the future generations. In my report, I talk about that if we have to take the human rights of future generations seriously, we need an ecosystem. We need an ecosystem that is moving away from the current focus merely on the present generations. And I have outlined 4 entry points to achieve this. The first of all, the crucial thing is that we should focus on the rights of future generations. The language of rights is crucial. We cannot merely talk about the needs and interests of future generations. And I think that is where I find the current draft declaration on future generations problematic, because it does not use the language of rights. I will also suggest that we should start thinking beyond human beings when we talk about future generations. Because if we leave behind plants and animals, lakes and rivers, human beings cannot survive. The second suggestion that I have made in my report is that we need to embed intergenerational equity in human rights due diligence and impact assessment processes. So whenever present decision makers are thinking about city planning, or they're talking about deep sea mining or anything of that nature, they have to consider not only the impact on current generations, but also on the future generations. The third consideration that we should keep in mind is representation. How do we ensure that the representatives of future generations are able to participate in decision-making processes? There are good practices from several states, and in my report I recommend that states, UN agencies and others should start thinking about involving representatives of future generations so that they can participate in those decision-making processes. The fourth recommendation that I make in my report is about involving and taking into account the interest of future generations in financial planning and budgeting. Because we cannot continue to borrow money and then mortgage the future of future generations. We can also not continue to exploit the natural resources and then nothing is left for the future generations. And I think that is where financial planning and budgeting is very crucial from the perspective of the rights of the future generations. When I presented this report to the Human Rights Council, I received a broad support from the member states about this idea of the right to development of future generations, and member states were very supportive of this idea that we need to consider the principle of intergenerational equity going forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We appreciate that presentation very much. Very helpful to have the recommendations boiled down into four, which are recognition of rights and focus on the rights of future generations in the context of impact assessment, representation of future generations, and in financial planning and budgeting. Some of the key areas where recognizing the rights of future generations makes a concrete difference. I'll turn over now to Professor Sandra Liebenberg, who is the Oppenheimer Chair in Human Rights Law at Stellenbosch University in the law faculty, that is, in South Africa. Her research focuses on economic and social rights, the equality, non-discrimination, healthy environment, and sustainable development. She has previously been a member of the UN Committee on Economic and Social Rights, and she's currently serving as the chair of the drafting committee of the Maastricht Principles on Human Rights of Future Generations, which is developing a comprehensive legal commentary on these principles. So I'll turn over to her now.
Thanks, Ashraf, and thanks for everyone for inviting me to be part of this webinar. This is a crucial question on the development of international law, but also in thinking about the kind of world we want to live to those who are going to inherit the future. So I am briefed to talk about the Maastricht Principles on the Human Rights of Future Generations, which were adopted last year in Maastricht in February 2023. And these principles basically represent the first systematic attempt to elaborate on the implications of recognizing future rights, human rights of future generations, and also to elaborate on the nature of the obligations and responsibilities on states, non-state actors such as business enterprises, intergovernmental organizations, individuals, and communities in recognizing the rights of future generations. I believe that the important contribution which the Maastricht Principles make is to infuse this temporal dimension into international law, to recognize that human beings exist within a continuum of time, and just as past injustices and human rights violations impact human rights in the present, particularly for disadvantaged groups, states in the global south, indigenous peoples, women, and so forth. So present-day actions, conduct, omissions will affect the enjoyment of the rights of those of our descendants to come. So the principles have a very broad scope. They deal with a range of contemporary threats that we can reasonably foreseeably see will have a profound effect on future generations' human rights. These include, as the Honorable Ambassador of the Republic of Vanuatu pointed out, the climate crisis and global environmental degradation, the growing and burgeoning inequality both within and between states, unsustainable patterns of production and consumption, the issues of new technologies, AI, and their unregulated impacts on human beings, weapons of mass destruction, and so forth. So the obligations are elaborated by dividing the principles according to the well-known human rights typology of respect, protect, promote, and fulfill. It also investigates topics such which the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Development referred to, which is the participation of future generations in decision-making, the recognition of their representatives, access to information, and then the very critical topic of access to remedies for future generations. So I think this is the crucial aspect that distinguishes simply recognizing a interest for future generation, a need and an interest versus a human right, because human rights attract accountability and the right to a remedy. And so this really crucial topic that where present action will violate or have a substantial effect on future generations' human rights, there should be access to a remedy. So the Maastricht Principles really provide a comprehensive synthesis of what we see the state of international law to be at present. It draws not only on international human rights law, but also broadly the fields of international environmental law, the law of sustainable development, humanitarian law, and also crucially from the values, belief systems, and cosmologies of indigenous peoples and other groups. So I anticipate that the recognition of future generations' human rights will only continue to grow and receive a renewed impetus from legal proceedings around the world and the work of UN agencies and special procedures. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Liebenberg, for delving into the principles and what they can do to and the change that it could make in practice to decision making. Those of you who are attending, really wanted to welcome you very much and invite you to add any questions you may have in the Q&A, or anything you'd like to do to prompt the discussion. There are, of course, among those of you who are attending, some names of people who are, who are distinguished contributors to this area as well. So please don't hold back. Difficult questions most welcome, as well as easy questions, any of any sort. So now we'll move to, having set the scene, set the basis. We'll now go to our panel of 5 people who are very involved in this field. And the first is Astrid Puentes Riano, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human right to a healthy environment. She teaches at the Berta Cáceres Environmental Justice Clinic at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. And she has more than 20 years of experience on environmental law, human rights and climate change, and the intersection of these with the perspective of climate justice, diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. And she has worked for and with communities, environmental defenders and indigenous peoples in Latin America, including in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And I will add that she brought that very much to bear as one of the people involved in the final discussions of the Master Principles. And so her perspectives were very much reflected in that document. The question we have for each of the panelists is, in your role, how are you contributing to advancing the legal protection of the rights of future generations? And each panelist will have only 2 minutes. So over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Ashback, y todas y todos por la invitación a este webinar tan importante. Y como voy a hablar en español, maybe just to remind people that if you can go down and then hit interpretation to make sure that you are in the channel if you need translation. Para mí ha sido un honor participar en este proceso de los principios de Maastricht, y desde el mandato estoy trabajando en 3 puntos que les quisiera compartir hoy. Primero que todo, en el avance y la aclaración de las obligaciones de los estados en relación con el derecho al ambiente sano, incluyendo desarrollando a través del mandato, voy a desarrollar estándares para aclaración de las obligaciones de los estados en relación con la protección de los océanos y el aire limpio, que son elementos esenciales del derecho. También a través de estándares para estudios de impacto ambiental y análisis estratégico y planeación de territorios, acceso a la justicia, participación pública y acceso a la información, protección de personas defensoras, pensando también incorporando los principios de las generaciones futuras. En segundo lugar, desarrollar recomendaciones para los estados, organismos internacionales y empresas, y también visitas a países y diálogos con estados, empresas y, por supuesto, niños, niñas y adolescentes. Este trabajo priorizando una visión feminista y también la protección de personas, grupos y pueblos en marginalización histórica, y promoviendo una visión interseccional para que la visión y el conocimiento de quienes han estado marginados históricamente puedan contribuir a las soluciones que necesitamos. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move to the next panelist, Christian Cortes, who's the Human Rights Officer at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He specifically focuses on gender and women's rights. And he's also worked on a range of other issues, including the rights of older persons, people with disabilities, economic, social, cultural rights, and sustainable development human rights. And before joining the United Nations, he was a professor at the University of Buenos Aires Law School. So to Christian, what, in your role, how are you contributing to the rights of future generations?
Thanks a lot for the invitation. So 3 points. One, OECHR is part of the core group of the UN high-level policy committee on programs that has drafted the UN Common Understanding on Future Generations, and we made sure that human rights are included there. So if you read this this document, human rights are the first principle: promote a vision for future generations based on human rights and equity. So a part of the UN Common Understanding on Future Generations for UN agencies includes human rights as a basic tenet. Second, in the same line, OECHR has advocated with member states in the adoption of the Declaration on Future Generations in different levels. One, in pushing for the recognition of the rights of future generations in the declaration. We might be happy or less happy with the results, but human rights are there in different levels. I would say there's direct recognition of human rights as founding principles in paragraph 2, 9, 13. There's recognition of specific rights, women's rights, the right to health. And then there's language that is convergent on a number of other issues, including the health environment, indigenous peoples, food security, inequalities, education, cultural rights. So there's some of that language has transpired into the declaration, and we hope it's adopted as such. And lastly, OSCHR has produced materials and interventions on the rights of future generations, particularly on its reports on climate change and human rights, and in interventions before courts. For example, I've been an expert witness on behalf of OSCHR in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights case, La Oroya, that explicitly links rights of future generations with the right to a healthy environment, right to life, and right to health. All.
Thank you, Christian. And of course, the La Oroya decision is one of probably one of the primary recognitions by an international regional human rights court of the rights of future generations. So we appreciate your expert witness there. Let's move next to Juliana Almeida, environmental law specialist at UNEP. She's currently working at the UN Environmental Program as an environmental law specialist, focusing on environmental law and judicial capacity development. And she has interfaced with the UN during her postings with the government of Portugal to New York and Vienna. And she has worked with the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union in 20 to 21 in Brussels, and was an advisor to a member of the European Parliament working on environmental issues. So over to you, Juliana Almeida.
Thank you very much, Ashfaq, and thank you very much for inviting me to be in this webinar. And really, my role here comes facilitated because I was just preceded by Christian and Astrid, for which UNEP has been working so closely together, both with the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the right to healthy environment and OHHR in really developing and advancing the connection of human rights to the environment. The enjoyment of all human rights to house, to food, to life, and the right to a healthy environment is dependent on the environment. And therefore, we've been working very hard to really advancing the right to a healthy environment and any other enforcing any other rights. And in relation to the future generations specifically, UNEP has been working with the other UN entities, exactly as Christian has mentioned, under the high-level committee on programs, to develop the UN system common principles on future generations. And they really recognize the role that the UN has in the multilateral system, that it is uniquely positioned to support member states and other stakeholders in advancing the rights, needs, and interests of future generations. And we've been doing that, for example, by clarifying that who are future generations is still a big question that is not widely understood. Why are they different from children and youth? What are their specific rights, needs, and interests? And also, in parallel, we work to clarify and contribute to the advancement of our duties to the future. What must we do today to guarantee that our policy making is fit for the future? And that's, I will continue in the next intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very helpful to hear about the progress at the UN level from both Christian and Juliana. It's a very significant concrete progress. And we'll turn now to Aditi Shetye from the World's Youth for Climate Justice organization. She's an environmental lawyer dedicated to achieving climate justice, and at her organization, she leads the legal advocacy and academic task force and contributes to the Asian Front development. She's a researcher in public international law and environmental law at the British Institute of International and Comparative Law. And before focusing on environmental law, she practiced civil and criminal law in Mumbai, India. So over to you, Aditi.
Thank you so much, Ashwak. It is such a great pleasure and honor to be part of this panel with so many dignitaries around me. So I really thank you so much for inviting me and also giving WICJ the space. I will be speaking from my WICJ capacity as lead of legal advocacy. In terms of, coming to the first question, like, what is your role and contributing to the legal protections of future generations? Well, the World's Youth for Climate Justice with the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change have been campaigning for an advisory opinion to the ICJ on climate change and human rights. And I think Ambassador Tevi already set the stage and introduced that. So we have been externally working to push at the UNGA level and also at national front levels to ensure that this is happening. And that is the core of our campaign. And the reason we started this was from an intergenerational justice narrative. We unfortunately, as many things stand today, and I understand they're progressing with all the documents that we have and the changes that are coming up, but it's just that we don't have the kind of representation to make those decision-making at the decision-making bodies. We don't have representation at those levels where I think we ought to be heard, also given the current state of the situation. So I think we've been working on those efforts. And I think Professor Deva also pointed out that we've been, that this kind of representation needs to be given. So in that sense, our efforts as at the moment are closely related to AOs. So we've been presenting at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and also mobilizing at the ITLOS. And to just sum it up, I think this sort of youth representation at this level and showing that we can work within the system and we don't need to call out anyone has been one of the points where we also prove that we can take this representation at that level and talk, and we know what we're talking about. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. And the organization has definitely elevated the legal backing of youth groups. It has been remarkable in that level. Okay, we'll move to the second round of interventions, and now we want to hear from you, our panelists, about what would be the next steps for the promotion of human rights in future generations. But before we do that, there's the last panelist, Sebastian Doig, who is the senior attorney and campaign manager, human rights and climate change, climate and energy programs at the Center for International Environmental Law, CL, which has been really pushing this work and including also on the Maastricht Principles. So he manages and coordinates and serves as the organizational focal point for CL's cross-program portfolio of work. that aims to promote human rights from the drivers of and response to climate crisis through international governance. And he leads CIEL's engagement with human rights institutions, seeking greater consideration and scrutiny by these bodies of the duties of states to prevent human rights harms caused by climate change or climate responses, and to promote environmental democracy. At UN COPs, he's generally known as the human rights guy. So, over to you, Seb.
Thank you, Ashfaq. Merci à toutes et à tous pour ces interventions. Je vais parler en français. Je voulais vraiment remercier tous les autres panélistes aussi pour leur travail, parce qu'on a vu que c'est vraiment ça qui contribue à avancer cet agenda. Pour nous, ce qui est vraiment essentiel quand on parle de notre rôle, c'est de continuer à travailler et à mobiliser tous les acteurs qui sont disponibles pour faire des progrès sur ces sujets. Et l'événement d'aujourd'hui, je pense que c'est un bon exemple, puisqu'on voit vraiment des perspectives qui sont complémentaires et qui viennent se renforcer. Donc, c'est travailler avec la société civile et les mouvements sociaux pour intégrer les droits des générations futures dans les campagnes qui sont déjà menées, pour éviter de dupliquer les efforts, mais vraiment de s'engager les uns les unes avec les autres. Travailler avec les institutions, ça on en a parlé déjà beaucoup, pour reconnaître de manière adéquate que les droits des générations futures, en fait, ils existent, ils nécessitent pas l'adoption de nouveaux cadres juridiques, mais au contraire, l'interprétation efficace et effective des cadres juridiques existants. Et puis, bien sûr, travailler avec les États pour garantir que les initiatives gouvernementales et non gouvernementales progressent de concert. Et je voudrais remercier Vanuatu et Luxembourg, par exemple, pour leur soutien, notamment avec l'organisation de l'événement aujourd'hui. La valeur par défaut de la justice intergénérationnelle, c'est vraiment le fait que c'est un principe à la fois éthique mais juridique qui existe déjà. Il n'y a rien dans nos textes juridiques, comme on l'a déjà entendu, qui justifie en fait cette discrimination contre les générations futures. Et c'est là où, pour nous, le travail que nous devons porter, c'est juste de demander l'interprétation de ces normes, de ces processus de décision, pour vraiment prendre en compte le fait qu'évidemment, les décisions que nous prenons à l'heure actuelle impactent les générations futures, pas juste la génération suivante, pas juste les jeunes et les enfants, ce qui est un point très très important, mais même au-delà de ça, vraiment les générations qui sont à venir. Et travailler aussi, et là je voudrais rebondir rapidement sur la question de Fatou Camara dans les questions, travailler pour avancer la justice intergénérationnelle de pair avec la justice intragénérationnelle, et vraiment lier les deux comme les deux dimensions d'un même projet.
Thank you, Sebastian. We'll move to the second round of interventions on what are the next steps after the Summit of the Future. We'll start again with Astrid.
Muchas gracias. Primero que todo, y bueno, como mencionó Cristian, tenemos una versión, pero me parece muy importante resaltar que ojalá la versión final de los documentos en la cumbre mencionen expresamente el derecho humano al medio ambiente limpio, sano y sostenible, como así recomendé en mi primer informe que presentaré en unas semanas a la Asamblea General. Este derecho fue reconocido por la Asamblea General en 2022 y es fundamental para que se puedan avanzar los compromisos de la cumbre y que se protejan los derechos de las generaciones futuras. En segundo lugar, es también vital trabajar para que los compromisos de la cumbre se cumplan de manera efectiva en la práctica y de manera urgente y coherente. Estos cambios deben iniciarse inmediatamente y reflejarse en mejoras de las políticas públicas y en las normas, incluyendo a través del control y monitoreo efectivo por parte de los estados a las empresas, sobre todo a los sectores que más han contribuido a la triple crisis climática, como los combustibles fósiles, y sectores que están también detrás de la degradación de los ecosistemas. Y enfatizo en la necesidad del cumplimiento de estas medidas, porque no tenemos tiempo ni podemos darnos el lujo que estos compromisos se queden solo en palabras. Por eso es vital Avanzar además con la responsabilidad y la rendición de cuentas de los estados y las empresas y los sectores que más han contribuido a estas crisis para que se cumpla la responsabilidad y que incluso se pueda avanzar en la reparación de los daños que hoy ya estamos viendo. También avanzar realmente hacia los cambios profundos y transformadores, porque desafortunadamente estos cambios están muy lentos, como la ciencia lo evidencia. Este proceso requiere, por supuesto, el involucramiento directo y la participación de todas las personas, como niñas, niños y adolescentes, asegurando que los compromisos sean obligatorios, y para ello necesitamos usar las herramientas disponibles como incidencia, litigio y participación directa. Es súper importante, con esto termino, la protección efectiva de los derechos de quienes están protegiendo el ambiente y el clima, asegurando también espacios seguros para las personas, también niños, niñas y adolescentes, garantizando el acceso a la información, participación efectiva y acceso a la justicia. Gracias.
Thank you, Astrid. And I think your intervention also addresses the question to some extent about the enforceability aspect using the tools at the national level. Now we'll turn to Christian. Anything you'd want to add on the next steps?
Lots of things. So now we will have an internal UN document, the Common Understanding on Future Generations, and an intergovernmental document, the Declaration of Future Generations. Both integrate human rights as a founding principle. So I think there's a need to spell out what human rights mean and what are the concrete implications of that. And the Maastricht principles are instrumental to that. But I think there is an educational function that UN agencies such as OHCHR and civil society can play in spelling out the concrete content of that. And I think we need to link the outcomes of some of the already of the developments that have already happened in treaty bodies, in the jurisprudence of human rights courts, in special procedures, and feed that into the interpretation of the documents. There would be a Secretary General report on the implementation, and there's a space for underscoring the gains regarding human rights. And I want to mention 3 areas that need spelling out. One is the application of the human rights-based approach principles, equality, non-discrimination, participation, access to information, legality, and accountability to the thinking regarding future generations. Second is aging and the care society that the future will see. So integrating that aspect also into thinking. And I would say the third one, which to some degree is included in the principle on the right to health in the declaration, is the idea that systems arrangement, collective arrangements, such as social security systems, the health system, policies regarding food security require a sustainable management in order to serve the rights of future generations. So the idea that we already have collective systems that should be invested in with a forward-looking consideration in order to ensure the rights of future generations. Over.
Thank you very much. And next to Julian.
Thank you, Ashfaq, and couldn't agree more with Christian and Astrid in really advancing and continue to promote application of rights-based approaches to policy making, and especially continuing the implementation throughout the world at country level and sub-national level of the right to a healthy environment. It will lead to better decision making and more accountability. And also the point made by Christian that this internal document of the UN, it will guide the UN entities as well to start including future generations considerations, the rights, needs, and interests of future generations in their own work. When we work in global policy making in New York, but also when we go to our country teams and we apply that policy making on the ground. And let me bring one key aspect of the work on future generations that we've not touched upon still here in this webinar, which is the importance of really inputting long-term and future thinking into our work. That will help when we start thinking about the impact, the risks that are coming up, and we start using more and more science and have better informed decision making, we will take into account more the rights of the present generations and the rights of future generations into how our policy making is really targeted to the future as well. And just one key aspect that I picked up from the special rapporteur on development, that meaningful representation, meaningful dialogue is needed of future generations and as well as of nature, and that we really work both for people and for planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juliana. We'll now turn to Aditi.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a critical next step would be ensuring that the new jurisprudence and the AO can give life to all these global frameworks and all these documents and the principles that we've been talking about through the whole webinar. And I think one way is that, of course, like the AOs on an international and a regional level, but then also on a domestic level, judgments like Oroya and also the Goa Foundation have already done that in the national perspective. So I think with new developments through the AOs, hopefully there is, and combining the legal framework that already exists, I think there is potential to take it even further. And that is, I think, what is needed to, ground the intergenerational justice aspect and then, take it forward. So I think the jurisprudence just gives a very foundational framework to all these strong instruments like the Maastricht principles and the declaration, the document will come out from the summit, as well. And then that's the legal, I think that's the legal aspect of it. And then in terms of mobilizing and then youth movements, I think meaningful engagement and capacity and educational building, that's what we do at WSJ. But I think it's also a way of showing young lawyers that, you can work in environmental law. There is something that's going on, because it so often happens because of so many issues of disparity. Young lawyers or students don't know that this is a way to work in the field. And I think that would then help in, the representation issues, the speaking at the, being present at decision-making bodies and all the ways of doing it, like how Professor Deva pointed it out, and also in his report. I think that is very, very important. And I think just to sum it up, I would really like to thank the FCC and Vanuatu because they started this campaign, and now, like, with us as well, like, this campaign becomes another shoulder to ensure that, we claim the space, like young people can claim the space in decision-making bodies. So I'll just thank you and keep it there.
Thank you. Over to Sebastian.
Oui, merci beaucoup et merci pour toutes les questions qui arrivent par le chat. Je pense que ce qui est très important, c'est de mettre en avant, quand on parle de prospective, d'opportunités futures, de vraiment se concentrer sur le fait qu'il y a différentes alternatives, différentes opportunités, et qu'on doit se concentrer sur les liens entre celles-ci. Donc, il y a le renforcement, on en a parlé beaucoup aujourd'hui, du développement juridique qui inclut par exemple les avis consultatifs des cours internationales de justice, on en a déjà parlé beaucoup, mais aussi qui inclut par exemple le travail des organes de traité des Nations Unies pour les droits humains, notamment par exemple le Comité sur les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, qui va nous expliquer comment mieux interpréter les obligations déjà existantes des États dans le contexte du développement durable. Et puis, il y a besoin de renforcer les développements institutionnels qui sont en cours et d'encourager de nouveaux développements institutionnels. Et du coup, je voulais conclure un petit peu sur une nouvelle positive, le fait que la nouvelle Commission européenne qui a été nommée, donc c'est un peu le gouvernement de l'Union européenne qui a été nommé il y a 4 jours, elle inclut la nomination d'un commissaire à l'équité intergénérationnelle. dont le mandat, c'est bien sûr la première fois que c'est le cas, le mandat inclut notamment l'objectif de s'assurer que les décisions prises aujourd'hui ne nuisent pas aux générations futures et il doit aussi élaborer une stratégie en matière d'équité intergénérationnelle. C'est vraiment des développements qui sont intéressants, mais comme le rapporteur spécial Deva l'a mentionné, ce qu'il faut faire très attention maintenant, c'est de ne plus perdre de temps avec des institutions, des avancées qui restent sur le point des principes et qui n'équipent pas les institutions ou les preneurs de décision avec des outils juridiques ou des leviers politiques pour vraiment permettre de replacer et reprotéger la justice intergénérationnelle en prenant en compte le fait que l'urgence de ces crises écologiques, par exemple, mais aussi de l'effondrement d'autres droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, il demande vraiment pas juste des principes, mais des outils juridiques et institutionnels très performants.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. So it's a call to action, and I already see the question and the comment from Fatou Kamara to take this work to for activism in Senegal. So we're looking forward to some good news from Senegal in a few years. Now we'll move to the questions and answers. Really an opportunity, colleagues, to pose any further questions you have. And as further questions come in, we'll try and verbally answer some of those that are open or some of that have actually already even been answered. So first to Professor Liebenberg, I know you've answered it to some extent, but if you'd like to just come in verbally to highlight the main points.
Yes, so thank you. So I think the question about the definition of future generations that was asked and also their representation, the key point to really note there is that as yet there is no universal definition of future generations, but there seems to be some convergence emerging around the definition in the Maastricht Principles that future generations are generations that do not yet exist, but will exist and inherit the earth. And they include then the specific descendants of the people, the groups, indigenous peoples that exist today. So this harks back to what I was saying earlier about the continuum of time and the fact that one can't separate or make a neat delineation between present and future generations, that there is a continuum of action that has profound implications for human rights. And unless we recognize future generations' human rights in the present, it may be too late for those future generations to repair the harm that is done to their rights, their ecosystems that must sustain their life, a livable climate, a sustainable lifestyle, and so forth. So I think that is the point that I wanted to make there. And, you know, also recognizing what the Maastricht Principles very strongly draw on and will do also in the legal commentary which is being drafted is the cosmologies and epistemologies of many indigenous peoples, peasant groups, traditional communities around the world that have long recognized the interlinkages in time and the continuity between past, present, and future. So that, and then I just wanted to quickly say a word about representative institutions. So obviously, like for many groups and entities that can't represent themselves, one would need to create and recognize institutions and parties that can represent the groups in, for example, legal proceedings, but also in parliamentary proceedings. We have wonderful examples of institutions from Ecuador and Wales, for example, commissions on future generations. So we would need to actively create these institutions and also ensure that they are inclusive, participatory, and represent a range of groups, particularly those who are systemically disadvantaged, because it is most likely their descendants that will inherit the disadvantages of the present. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll now move, perhaps Sebastian, you can address the question on geoengineering.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. Just answering in English this time, but I think this question is actually really bringing to the fore the fact that there is a very strong connection between the strong and effective protection of the principle of precautionary, the precautionary principle, and the protection of the human rights of future generations. And that protecting the human rights of future generations requires states to regulate adequately policies and conducts that will create irreversible damages to human societies and ecosystems who threaten to do so, at least. I'll point to the fact that in the Maastricht principles, we have Principle 19 that speaks specifically about the fact that the failure to regulate effectively and prohibit, where necessary, activities that might have foreseeable and substantial risks to human rights of future generation, like genetic engineering and geoengineering, should be prohibited by states. And there is additional legal research in relation to this that I will point to when answering the question in written. But I think these linkages between foreseeable, irreversible harm, the precautionary principle, and the legal obligations related to the protection of future generation, that's a very important nexus.
Thank you, Sebastian. Next, we'll just turn to Astrid to address some questions on compliance.
Muchas gracias, Ashka. Creo que varias de las preguntas que están en el chat, muchas gracias por incluirlas, tienen que ver con cómo hacemos para implementar los acuerdos que están allí. Y yo creo que esto, sin duda, es uno de los retos más grandes, no solo de los resultados de la cumbre del futuro, sino hoy en día del derecho internacional. Y por eso me parece muy importante resaltar que tenemos que dejar la resistencia a incluir y reconocer obligaciones y cumplirlas. Y esto es uno de los retos que incluso vimos en los resultados de la cumbre del futuro y estamos viendo en otros espacios internacionales, como en la negociación de las obligaciones en relación con las empresas. Hay momentos en que es importante pasar de los compromisos y de las palabras a las obligaciones para que podamos aterrizar en los hechos. Entonces me parece muy importante que resaltar esto para que ojalá tanto los estados como las empresas puedan realmente aterrizar en las obligaciones, que es la única manera en que después vamos a poder aterrizar en las acciones diferenciadas que necesitamos ver. En relación con la participación efectiva de niños y niñas indígenas y organizaciones indígenas en los procesos de los principios de Maastricht, quisiera mencionar que fue un proceso, bueno, y también a mis colegas y Sandra podría mencionar, hubo varias organizaciones indígenas que participaron de este proceso. Fue un proceso como de más de 4 años. Y que se hizo también a través de consultas, un montón de talleres en donde se incluyeron también estas perspectivas, como mencionaba Sandra también. Una de las inspiraciones para los principios de Maastricht es justamente el conocimiento indígena que varios pueblos alrededor del mundo tienen en cuenta, incluso en los comités y en los consejos de personas para pensar en las decisiones en los pueblos indígenas 7 generaciones adelante. Gracias.
Thank you. So we'll have Aditi.
Thank you so much, Ashfaq. I just wanted to add a little bit on what Seb touched upon earlier on, the duty to prevent. And I also think that, jurisprudence and why I'm emphasizing the AOs and the development of how it's been going to be interpreted is important by the Inter-American Court and also the ISJ, and also other jurisprudence of other courts, is that through accepting or through adopting the right to a healthy environment, I think that that also has created positive obligations on states on the foreseeable harm in the context of climate change, which is also irreversible. Sorry. So I think this engenders also a broad base of obligations, which will also be very interesting if the ICJ does touch upon that and talks about that aspect. And I think that feeds into again the issue and the points that were raised by Professor Sandra on the collective dimension, on the intertemporal aspects, because and again it feeds into the representation part and giving decision, being present at decision making bodies part, because children and youth are temporally the closest to future generations. So them being present, again, I know I'm reiterating my points. I think this kind of jurisprudence will allow that, in terms of give it a pathway with commissions and in national policy. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Now to Christian next.
So picking up on Veronica's question on disappointment or not, I mean, let's wait till the adoption of the Declaration on Future Generations, and let's see the glass half full and half empty. On half full, we have the issue inserted in the UN agenda explicitly. So I think that's important. Of course, I follow on behalf of OECHR the negotiations, and of course, many things in the more ambitious initial draft were dropped in negotiations, part of sacrifice. One is now it speaks of the needs and interests of future generations. There was a discussion of whether we can recognize the rights, but human rights are integrated there. And as I said, they're integrated explicitly as a general principle in some specific rights, and then the content of many of the paragraph, even if it does not speak about human rights, is convergent with the content of human rights obligations. So I think it offers, as it is, and hopefully it will be adopted with a much change, it already offers some hooks there regarding the possible interpretations in the lens of human rights. And then your question is also whether other rights which are not related to a healthy environment and climate change have been considered. And if you read the declaration, yes, there are a number of entry points there regarding the right to health, the right to education, cultural rights, indigenous peoples, gender equality, and women's rights. So I think it is a promising document in terms of its possible development, and it needs to be hooked with the developments in the human rights field. So I think we are the actors that need to make that connection. Over.
Great. Thank you, Christian. I'll just turn to Professor Liebenberg to address the question about trade-offs.
Thanks. That's a great and important question, Alice. And I think again, I think the Maastricht principles really have a strong approach to dealing with the issue. I mean, of course, trade-offs and limitations of rights, we do have the tools to balance rights and to limit rights if need be. Particularly important in this context that we do not see the trade-offs between present and future generations as sort of undifferentiated groups. That we also recognize that the burdens of reducing unsustainable patterns of consumption and reasonable restrictions on rights that or excessive patterns of consumptions in the present should fall primarily on advantaged groups and states of the global north, and it should not be disadvantaged groups and states of the global south that bear these disproportionate burdens. So the interlinkages between intragenerational inequality and intergenerational inequality are very crucial in the context of your question. Thank you.
Thank you. And just say, in other words, we so it's more a question of trade-offs within rights rather than trade-offs between rights, or at least trade-offs within the resource allocation to realize these rights. Okay, we're coming to a close now, and just to very quickly address Fatu's question, really a lot of the rights of future generation is already contained in national, international, regional law. So in a sense, the declaration, the UN declaration, is more about political commitment, and so the issue is really more about generating more political commitment to apply laws that are already there, they're already in place, they can really be drawn upon. And with that, we are coming to the end. So thank you everybody for your thank you first to the speakers, the panelists, for their great interventions. Thank you to the participants for very, very detailed and good questions. I appreciate that. Certainly challenges everybody, and hopefully really want to count on everybody's commitment to take this work to the next steps as we move on, because obviously we have not solved everything at the Summit of the Future. I would like to thank the organizers of this panel, which are the governments of Vanuatu and Luxembourg, OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNEP, and the civil society organizations, FIAN International, the Right to Food Organization, and CL. So with that, I'd like to close this event and thank you everybody for your participation.